For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Derehove. An ecumenical church-based group, Kairos Southern Africa, has published a theological reflection to coincide with the African National Congress's centenary celebrations. Joining me in the studio is the group chairperson, Rev Moss Ntlha, to offer some insights into the documents and what the signatories are hoping to achieve. Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon, for having me.
Please could you tell us who and what Kairos Southern Africa is and why you decided to undertake this reflection?
Kairos Southern Africa is a group of Christian theologians, Christians. Some of them will be church leaders, some of them ordinary lay Christians, all of whom have one thing in common. They have a very deep interest in ensuring that faith speaks to society, speaks to the nature of our politics, our democracy, and seeks to make sure that our democracy is everything that the people of South Africa hoped that it would be. And so we use the name Kairos because in 1985, 86, thereabouts, we published a document called the Kairos document. That was a document that helped very much to clarify the nature of the conflict that we had then in the country, both for the churches but also for broader society. And it was a very important document in the history of the church in that it helped churches make a choice about whether they were going to be supportive of apartheid or acquiesce to it, or just in one way or another just be neutral to it. And many Christians decided after that document that they wanted to take sides and actually be on the side of the poor. And so it was a very important document, not only for us in South Africa, but around the world. People saw it as a very important tool to help them understand what the role of the church ought to be in contexts of dictatorship, oppression, whatever. And so we used that as part of our background, but also to say conditions today are such that the prophetic spirit of the 80s is much more necessary today, and that we ought to reactivate the networks that help put together the original Kairos. So that's who the Kairos Southern Africa is, the individuals coming together and saying, let's start a conversation.
Now, the document starts by congratulating and praising the ANC for its achievement during the struggle and in its transition into a governing party, but it also serves to highlight the strong historical links between many Christian churches and the evolution of the movement, which itself was started on church grounds in 1912. Can you take us through some of the highlights?
Yeah, that's correct. We decided, let's congratulate, this is 100 years of what we see as an effort by the people of South Africa to mount a massive struggle against oppression and so on. And so 100 years on, it's very important to look back and to celebrate that. And we think it's great that the ANC had the imagination to do so. We see the African National Congress as an instrument that got used over that period to end apartheid, to end colonialism, and so on. And so we celebrate that, and we do so in a way that does two things. One is to say that faith, and in particular the Christian faith, was very important in that whole history. Not to mention the fact that the very formation of the African National Congress happened in a church in 1912. And so, and even before 1912, the faith, Christianity, the church helped to prepare the ground that made it possible for people to begin to think in a way that said there's something wrong in terms of the way things were, that inspired people to take a stance against apartheid or colonialism then. And so we felt it was very important to celebrate that, to reclaim that tradition in a sense. A lot of people in South Africa have forgotten the fact that faith played an important role in the past struggle, and so they've almost pulled back and allowed secular society to proceed as though faith and God was never part of that whole movement to end oppression. And so we, in the document, try to retrieve those elements of what the churches have done before 1912, after 1912. We have a rich history of the way in which people of faith played a role. The national anthem, to start with, is a prayer. So you can think about it in this way, that from the darkest moments of our struggle, people prayed. People understood that the God of history was going to come through in the end for them. People understood that even the very struggle that they were involved in were as a result of of inspiration from God. Chief Luthuli, who was president of the African National Congress at one stage, affirmed emphatically that he was in the ANC precisely because he was a Christian and felt that his faith required that he becomes part of the people's struggles. A good number of the presidents of the African National Congress were either a reverend or people of very deep faith. And we see that the entire inspiration for that struggle had very significant Christian roots. We are concerned that that is being lost. We're concerned that on the part of Christians, a lot of Christians are abandoning that history and that legacy. But we're also concerned that the political leadership or the organization of the ANC seems to undermine its very history, the very things that inspired it into existence, and are very, in important ways, departing from the things that made the African National Congress great in the first place. And so we felt, it's important to blow the whistle in a sense and say, let's return to the things that made us great.
Now, it is also a critical appraisal of the retreat of the church from political engagement in Southern Africa. Why does Kairos Southern Africa view this as a problem?
Historically, there was a tendency that said you have to keep faith on the one side and politics or culture or arts or anything, sports, whatever, keep these things separate. Now, we have come to conclude that that's not correct. God doesn't separate things in that way. And so the struggle to end apartheid helped us in important ways to see the need to integrate, that life is holistic, that the church has to be a part of what is going on. We recognize that currently, and it's been, I think, ever since 1994, a sense of retreat by people of faith, by the church, from the public square, almost as a way of saying now that the politicians who were then, before 94, many of whom were barred or in exile or in prison or whatever, now that they're there, let the church retreat. We feel that's a very dangerous thing. It's almost as if to say that the church was important in the struggle, but is not important in deciding how we shape our democracy. And we think that is dangerous, that if ever there was a time where church withdrew from life, from society, that is to abandon a very important part of our faith. But thankfully, there is a growing awareness that we ought to return to a commitment to engage society, to speak truth to power, so to speak, and to engage in different aspects of public life.
At the heart of the document, though, is an appeal for introspection by the ANC itself, as well as a call for the greater self-criticism by its leaders and a return to the idea of that governance should be about service rather than status.
Yeah. What has become increasingly clear over the last several years has been a almost forgetting that people were called to leadership in government, or so are called upon to do that in the name of the people, to serve the people, and to bring about such changes as people sacrifice their lives to achieve. Mm-hmm. Now that, in many instances, is not happening. We see a crop of political leaders who are very self-serving, who use the language of poverty, transformation, and so on, to achieve personal interests rather than what the people want. And so, in that sense, we feel something desperately wrong has happened, both at the level of individuals within the ruling party, but also in sometimes at policy levels as well. And we feel that it is very important for us to retrieve the traditions that have once made the African National Congress great. The values that said the poor are important, that Nelson Mandela, for example, at his speech in Rivornia trial, spoke about how he would die to see a society that is non-racial, that is just, where everybody is treated fairly. And we would like to see the emergence of leaders who do that kind of thing, be willing rather to die than to be corrupt or to foment hatred between different people, and so on and so on. And so we feel that there is a lot of work to do. 100 years of celebration, yes, but the job is not complete yet. And our concern is, would this party that helped in the last 100 years be a party that helps us in the next 100 years to continue in fulfillment of the dreams of those who have gone before us?
You are hoping to get other Christians to sign onto the document. Why is that the case, and do you think such an activity has the potential to become as powerful a tool as was influential the Kairos document of 1985, which mobilized many Christians in the struggle against apartheid?
Yes, that's correct. We are hoping to open a conversation between South Africans. Our goal is that we, by the end of this year, will have 1 million, if not more, people signing up. This will do for us two things. One is that it will open a conversation among people, a very important conversation about what kind of democracy we want. At this point, the dominant voices that speak to the question, what kind of democracy we want, is the ruling elite. Ordinary people are, for the most part, excluded from this discussion. Their voices, unless they speak within the party or some other organized power bloc, ordinary people are left outside of the equation. And so this document hopes to open a discussion where millions of South Africans will sign up to it. Secondly, that it will help us to build a mass movement. In the end, as it was in the Kairos document, we made the discovery through the Kairos document in the 80s that once people have clarified what it is they want, it doesn't take long till politicians begin to come in line with what the people want. Now, to the extent that those in power stop conversations among people or confuse the conversation, to that extent, there is no challenge to those in power. So our campaign to have people sign and become part of a movement is a way of hoping to change the balance of forces between people and those in power.
Well, thank you very much, Reverend, and I wish you all the best with this campaign.
Thanks a lot, Shannon. Thanks.
That was Rev Moss Ntlha discussing the Kairos Southern Africa campaign.